Well, you may have heard that I recently started a Discord server not very long ago. Actually, not long ago at all. And by not long ago, I mean like less than a week ago. It's been a very short time, but it has been a short yet eventful time. The following story is something that has largely been erased from history. The remnants of it are hidden in audit logs and people's testimonies. The main source was deleted. So let me start my story with a quick explanation of how things got to where they were. As you can see from like the right side of the Discord, we have various roles. Cornbread Custodian, the Bagel Baron. One role not featured, however, is the Muffin Moderator, and with the first Muffin Moderator is where this story begins. The first person to ever achieve this rank was the same person who created the Bread League, and he is known as Polish Raspberries, the one who started things off. And things were calm. There's always, the calm before the storm, as they say, but this was like the calm before the calm before the end, the apocalypse. That's what this was. Because an election was triggered, because everybody likes a good democracy. Everybody likes some fun politics. And so, a little foreshadowing, I guess I could say, when you bequeath someone with complete power, and then that person also creates their own political party for the election, that's when things take an interesting route, and hey, that's exactly what happened, because the first of these factions was the Raspberrian faction, one led by Polish Raspberries himself. And this is where things get very interesting, because let me tell you, there were many more than just 2 parties. There weren't just 3, not just 4, not just 5, but 6 parties. There was the Up Party. Yeah, I think it's based off of the movie. I don't know, actually. I shouldn't make any assumptions. The Up Party definitely on the opposite end of the spectrum from Polish's party. Polish had to put his party in the middle, like a moderate, but all the other parties ended up on the entire end of the spectrum, making things not, as ideal. Another party that popped up was the glorious SHAKSOC, modeled after the good old SHAKSOC. Especially I like, the shake part, because I think it has, some hidden meanings. But the most important and most influential of these parties was the Kaiser party, which later changed its name to the Techno Union for various reasons, led by Rosa. Yes, that Rosa, from the Dread League. But we can see they are very authoritarian, I guess you can say. And this was not something that the Raspberrians liked. And the last party was the Nationalist party. Pretty obvious what it is. It was really early on that a fundamental issue with the election popped up, and this was an election that would decide if democracy would still exist. And when an election like that happens, things get really complicated. So on one side of the issue, with the most democratic, we had the Raspberrian faction. Of course, Polish Raspberries was instituting the election for the own legitimacy of the regime. It had to be for democracy. But then after that, Nationalist, SHAKSOC, Up, and then at the very extreme autocratic end was the Techno Union, setting up the stage for a battle between 2 extremes. Nothing in the middle could win. So at first, from the subtle information I can gather, some of the more weak parties that weren't really present, well, not weak parties, don't take it like that, like the less solid parties, the parties that weren't really on those extreme ends, kind of faded away for the most part, and people were more divided by issues rather than their party lines. It wasn't like it immediately devolved into just the 2 extremes. It was a matter of issues. It was a matter of many issues back and forth, different sides for different issues, but as things went on, it was pretty obvious what was going on. And there was an obvious displacement of power, so there was a smart thing to do. From what I can tell, a vote was called for by Rosa, she had an advantage on the playing field, and it would be quite ideal to call a vote now. So the first vote was called, and this vote led to results that honestly were the best case scenario for the Raspberrian faction. So here are the results, and you can probably tell that there is quite a big chunk of neither of the candidates, pretty much neither of Polish or Rosa, because only the real two extremes were present at this point. No one could win if it was a six-way vote, but no coalitions had really formed. It was just a battle of who should lead out of these two people who were obviously taking the positions. Rosa still didn't have more votes than the votes for neither of them, so there was still definitely some conflict going on. So it was obviously time for a coalition government to form, but the opposite of that was happening for the Raspberrians, because the Raspberrian party split into the main party and then a reformist party, which was great. And there might have also been an anarchist party that popped up too, I'm not exactly sure. Again, all the information was mostly deleted or lost to time, and I can't scroll through Discord forever to find it. Coalition government was definitely not going to work out in favor of Polish, because if this coalition government was formed, it would obviously form among the groups that were working together, and that would obviously isolate him. Any sort of vote would be detrimental to the authority of the server and the authority of the regime. But the second vote was still called nonetheless, and it was obvious what would happen. Or was it? Because Rosa was fighting against something more than just the Raspberrian faction. Rosa was fighting against democracy itself. A democratic coalition was formed. It was formed in hopes of providing stability to the democracy and ensuring democratic principles. It wasn't formed to support a specific faction, and this gave it a chance. However, even though the Democratic faction could attract defectors who cared about democracy, it only really grabbed one party, the Reformist Party, and this was a problem. But, unfortunately, both SHAKSOC and the Nationalist Party were having tendencies towards this autocracy. And even though the Raspberrian faction was fighting on the principles of democracy, vote was made, and the Democratic coalition fell short of success. A new regime, an authoritarian regime, was legitimized. An election result could not destabilize and delegitimize the election itself. It doesn't make sense for there to be a vote that upends the voting system. It can't be legitimized on that factor. Well, actually, it did kind of happen a little bit historically, but it didn't go so well for Rosa, and things began to be more tense. Weapons were drawn, the military was called in, the elections were forfeited. Therefore, the Democratic coalition ended up being the ones to overthrow the democratically elected fascist regime through a military coup. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what happened. A military coup led by the Democratic coalition overthrew the democratically elected autocracy. It's insane, but that's what happened, and I don't really know. They're dark times. The military coup ran supreme. That is where things ended off, with a promised election the next day. And of course, there was plenty of outrage and resistance, but no one could really fight back. Of course, you know, Polish had the Muffins still, well, and technically Rosa did too at this point. That's a side story, though. It was pretty good, and things continued to get more interesting, but that's where I'll leave it off for today. We had more elections and stuff, but I would like to thank everybody who was a part of the elections and whatever. I don't even know what to think of them at this point. Discord Wars has really begun. If you enjoyed, I usually don't do this. I usually just play Hearts of Iron 4, but if you enjoyed this or just enjoy the regular stuff that I do or want to see more stuff like this, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.